Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women: performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen.
Welcome back, Queens. Today we're really excited. We have Dr. Donna Duffy. She has a joint appointment at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and she is an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and director in the Center for Women's Health and Wellness in the School of Health and Human Sciences. Donna completed her PhD in the Department of Kinesiology at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Prior to coming there, Donna completed her BS and Master's of Education at Boston University, and Donna has graduate faculty status at UNCG, where she teaches in the athletic training program and the EDD program. Donna also coordinates the undergraduate sport coaching minor in kinesiology, and Donna has an active research agenda called the Female Behavior and Recovery After Injury and Neurotrauma Project. So you can guess what we're wanting to pick her brain over. She focuses on the neuroendocrine function and dysfunction in female athletes after a concussion, as well as the cognitive and neuromotor consequences of a concussion. Donna is also involved with research projects in the virtual environment for assessment and rehabilitation laboratory under the direction of Dr. Chris Rea, where she's focused on neuromotor function and changes of female athletes before and after a concussion. In addition, Donna collaborates closely with Dr. Jenny Etner, Dr. Lori Weidman, Dr. Scott Ross, and Dr. Will Adams. Hopefully I didn't say anybody's name incorrectly. Donna also has research collaborations with many faculty and clinicians outside of UNCG, including the Female Athlete Program, which is where I had the pleasure of hearing you speak, the CTE Center in School of Medicine at Boston, Gaelic Games for Girls at University College Cork in Cork, Ireland, with various community organizations, including Greensboro Roller Derby, Pink Concussions, the Girl Athletic Leadership Schools in Denver, and Girl Fit in Newton, Massachusetts. Donna is the research consultant for Pink Concussions and serves on their board of advisors. Donna also holds a research scientist position under Dr. Kate Ackerman at Boston Children's Hospital, and Donna was a visiting research scientist in Department of Neurology and CTE Center and School of Medicine. Donna's on the board of directors at the Women's Resource Center in Greensboro, North Carolina, and serves as the managing editor of Women in Sport and Physical Activity Journal. Donna's research on female athletes and head injuries have been published in several peer-reviewed journals, and Donna was recently quoted in the New York Times on her work related to female athletes and concussions. What do you not do, Donna?
That sounds so ridiculous. Like when you were reading that, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I just need to cut a lot of that out.
No, celebrate your accomplishments. Quite a woman.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited because concussions, especially with U.S. women's soccer, really came to light that, I think there's been so much focus in football, and rightfully so, but how we overlooked females. So I think first off, what would be really helpful is just define what a concussion is and how does one even confirm that they have one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a concussion, how you get a concussion, right? So how you get a concussion is basically there is a blow to the head or the body that causes the brain to move back and forth in your skull. And as a result of that movement inside your skull, the brain has different reactions. Some are at the chemical level. Some are sort of at the what I'll call like an electrical level, like the communication wires, etc. And basically there's a disruption there. And one of the things that makes a concussive experience different for women and girls is the HPA axis. So one of the things that is wildly understudied is what happens when estrogen and progesterone become a part of the concussive experience, because it is released from the HPA axis when the brain sustains trauma. And so we know that hormones are quite they dictate a lot of what goes on in our bodies, just like a behavioral standpoint. And basically what happens is that there's this neuroendocrine cascade when the HPA axis is disrupted for whatever reason. And when that happens, there can be either a flooding, that's not the right word, but it's just sort of an oversaturation of these female hormones, or we can find that these female hormones aren't being produced the way that they should. Mm-hmm. So the disruption can cause either a fluctuation, or they can cause the hormones to basically not produce and secrete the way that they're supposed to. And so one of the things that we know about that is that a lot of that for women is dictated by their menstrual cycle. Now, of course, birth control varies. Various types of birth control, especially hormonal birth control, can also influence this, because that's already controlling those two specific hormones. But we do know that these particular hormones are playing a role in how we can begin to differentiate between the way a female athlete and a male athlete experiences their concussive event. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there are a lot, when you asked about defining concussion, mm-hmm. there are, I think the last number I heard was 26 different definitions of what a concussion is.
Wow.
And so the definition that we use is actually the CDC's definition. And we use that definition because it includes not just a bump or a blow to the head, but also a bump or a blow to the body. So when you really think about body contact, right, when you're participating in sport, your hips, for example, can go one way while your head is going the other. And so that's the reason why we really embraced and worked from the CDC's definition, is because we do know that body blows can also cause the brain to move around in the skull. In terms of how do you diagnose a concussion, that is a really good question. And I think that clinicians and doctors, they would say that it is something that, quite frankly, is still being grappled with. It used to be that we would talk about concussion as in different grades. So you have like a grade 1 concussion, for example, or grade 2 concussion. That process, that's really stopped. They've stopped having the language around how do you diagnose something like that has really stopped. But to be able to say that a person has a concussion, basically the doctors throughout the country and internationally as well, they use kind of a systemized checklist. And they just, if you tick off the X number of boxes, then you're diagnosed with a concussion. One of the biggest things about the concussive experience, that too, is just the recovery and rehabilitation, which is where I would say we don't have much information at all. When I ask doctors, especially the ones that I work with, so if you have a 16-year-old a 16-year-old female come in to your clinic and she presents with a head injury and you determine that it's a sport-related concussion, what do you tell her to do? And so, it becomes, it's the typical stuff like take your time, get some cognitive rest, do this, do that. And so it's a very interesting thing, because some people will report that they actually don't need that. And that they're ready to do this, and this. And sort of implementing some of those return to guidelines, right? So the return to play, return to work, return to learn, etc. But it's a very interesting thing, because one of the things that I am particularly interested in looking at is this idea of subconcussive trauma. So subconcussive trauma is trauma to the brain that does not result in immediate symptoms. So immediate symptoms of a concussion are typically things like dizziness, nausea, confusion. Some people may even lose consciousness. But with subconcussive trauma, you're taking blows to the head or the body, but it's not resulting in anything that would disrupt your play or your daily activities. So it's a very interesting thing in that way, because, often people say that we have a concussion crisis in this country. And while I think there's some merit to that, I think what's scarier is that we have a subconcussive crisis in this country. When you really think about the number of subconcussive experiences a person could have in their sport, but also just because if we know that concussions themselves are underreported by athletes, imagine how much subconcussive trauma is underreported. So they wake up the next day, right? They feel fine after they've played their football game, and then they wake up the next day and they have a massive headache. Is it dehydration? Did I not eat enough last night after my game? Did I not rehydrate the way I was supposed to? Well, no, you took a pretty big hit in the second quarter, and at the time, you just kind of you stuck with it and you played your game, and you didn't have any of those sort of quote unquote normal or typical symptoms. And so now this subconcussive trauma is kind of catching up with you. So I think that is one of the things that is super scary, especially when it comes to diagnosing concussion. There's no way to diagnose subconcussive trauma.
Really? I think if I remember right in the presentation, you said sometimes they can have symptoms up to 48 hours after the insult. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, they can't. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it can take, and they can, absolutely they can. Yeah, it can take a while, and for even symptoms to show up. If it's behavioral for some people, or people start to feel more depressive-like symptoms, right? Those things might not really surface. Those behaviors and the changes in those behaviors, it could take weeks for that stuff to surface. So one of the things that I'm starting to really wonder about is if concussive experiences are a lot like other types of injury, in that they need to be individually managed and they need to be individually rehabilitated. Because this one size fits all approach to, like, for example, going through the return to play protocol, right? Athletes will point blank tell you that they know how to take that test, that they know how to
pass it with an A.
Right. They know what words are coming up. They know what they have to do. So there's just sort of this learned phenomenon with that. And so they either can pass with flying colors if they want to, or they can completely bomb it, right? If they don't want to go back and play. So I think that's the really tricky thing, is that with concussive trauma, some of the standardized tests that are being used, and quite frankly, most often used, are ones that athletes, once they go through the first iteration of the test, they know what they need to do to get back out there. And athletes have reported in some of our research that they tell each other what's coming. So if you and I are friends and we're on a team, so if you get a concussion in week 2 of the season and you come back, right? So your 7 to 10 day window is closed. You pass the return to play guidelines. You're back on the field. And in week 4, I get a concussion, that you'll tell me, this is what you need to do. This is what they're going to say, because we need you back on the field when we play on Monday afternoon. Right. And so they help each other through it. They tell each other how to pass the test. And so diagnosing a concussion and what that means, I think, like I said, doctors and clinicians, athletic trainers, whoever might be in a position to quote unquote diagnose those things, I think that they'll tell you that sometimes it's just very obvious. The student is dazed and confused and, those types of things. They don't know what day it is. But, I mean, they can pull them off the field because of their symptoms, right? And that's really what you're looking for, are those symptoms. But to actually diagnose a concussion, there are some scholars in this field that actually think that we should stop using that term altogether because it's just this arbitrary term that doesn't really mean anything. But when I can't remember how long ago it was, but do you remember a while ago there was sort of a shift away from concussion to TBI?
Uh-huh.
And then there was the little M that got put in front of it for mild TBI. And it freaked everybody out because they're like, wait, it's a brain injury? It's a traumatic brain injury? So then people step back away from that because it was so traumatizing. And so I think right now, quite honestly, a lot of what's going on with diagnosing concussions in a clinical space is messy. And it's not because doctors, physicians, athletic trainers, it's not because they don't care. That's not it at all. It's not because they're not doing right by their patients. That's not it at all. It's that we have not standardized this language, and we don't have, for example, normative values, with the exception of the male normative values that the return to play, return to learn, and return to work guidelines were based on.
And the brain is so fascinating. I can remember my first experience witnessing concussion is actually with my mom. And I know I was young enough not to drive, but I was off school that day and I had been doing something. I grew up on a farm, and I walk in and my mom is sitting in my dad's chair with her breeches on and her riding boots, like covered in dirt and cockleburrs. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, why are you off of school? I'm like, Mom, it's a holiday. And then she just kind of looks at me. So then I panicked and think that the horse is still out there tacked up somewhere. Nope. She had gotten off, put up all the tack, came in and sat down. And then it was kind of like all of a sudden she's like, I have no idea where I'm at. So it was a very strange experience, of course, having to call Dad and then take her to the hospital. But, one of the other things that you spoke to is you said that you believe that males tend to present a little bit different than females initially. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So, yes, I think that that's true. In terms of the literature around this, we do know from the literature that some researchers believe that women present with stronger or more exaggerated symptoms, and that they take longer to recover, where male athletes don't report such a longer recovery time, and they report sort of less symptoms. But to be honest with you, I think that literature really needs to be looked at. And I say this because in one of the articles that I pulled, it was a long time ago now, when I was looking at studies that were male-specific versus female-specific versus co-sex, so males and females in the same study. The interesting thing that really popped out at me when I was reading that was that men report their concussions, but women complain about their concussions. And so some may think, well, that's, they're saying the same thing, but I would argue no. I would argue that when you say that someone's reporting something, it's sort of this very authoritative sort of, this is what's happened to me, where females complain about their symptoms. I think that that's a different message, right? And so words do matter. And so when we really think about that, I have to wonder if in some of that research, there's just what I would consider to be some bias, right? And so I think that one of the things that has to be done is we really have got to look at this literature to see if, in fact, symptoms do last longer for female athletes, right? Or it's just the way that the research has been written. And so we need to take a deep dive into that. I will say that from our own experience and our own research, that women do have different experiences, but if women are in fact taking longer to recover, we need to better understand why. And if women are in fact taking long to recover, and the return to play guidelines, for example, that are based on male normative values, if they are taking longer to recover, then it would seem like those standards, those guidelines don't fit the female athlete already, because it's a 7 to 10 day window, right? That symptoms will just sort of spontaneously correct themselves. There's not really there's no standardized protocol for concussion recovery, right? It's if you need to rest. I remember when I got my first concussion skiing, and I was coming down this trail, and I was skiing with one of my friends from high school, and I made a big mistake, and I stopped around a blind corner to let her catch up with me. And when she came around that corner, we literally ran into each other, and we both blacked out.
Oh, no.
I don't remember anything. I remember seeing her, and it was just like a big blue blur. And then I just remember waking up on the ground with other friends standing around us like, what happened to the two of you? Right. And so it used to be, and when we were coming home, my uncle was like, don't fall asleep, you two, don't fall asleep. You both got a concussion today. If you fall asleep, you're going to slip into a coma. And I'm like, that I believed him. I mean, he was my uncle. He was a coach. He knew what he was talking about. And so, that's the thing, right? So much has changed about what we know about concussion. But then I have to stop and say, has it really? Right? Because we know now, for example, that cognitive rest and actually sleeping can help, where 25 years ago, you didn't go to sleep. And so there has been some advancement in that way, but in a lot of other ways, when it comes to rehabilitation and recovery, there is so much that we don't know. Now, the thing that really sticks out for me with regards to that is, when you think about research and you think about the implementation or just even the development, let's say, of clinical guidelines, right? So research is doing all this work, and then you want to be able to come up with outcomes and find things in your research that could be applied in a clinical setting, right? For me, that's the end goal, right? If not, then what's it all for? So, but the problem is that it takes so much research with such a large population over such a significant period of time before any type of guidelines could ever even be considered. Right. And so when you really think about that, the female athlete right now, in my opinion, is the most vulnerable athlete out there, because the current guidelines that we use around female athletes and concussion shouldn't even be applied to them. And there's just too much that we don't know about what happens in the brain around that neural cascade when they take a bump or a blow to the head that's causing their brain to move around in their skull.
One thing I'm curious if anybody's investigating, this is just in my clinical practice, but I have had a handful, and I say more than 3 or 4 female athletes that had no report of disordered eating until after their concussions. Have you had anybody else report anything similar to that?
It's so interesting that you asked that, because part of the work that I'm beginning with Kate Ackerman and her team, Laura Moretti at Boston Children's, is that very question. Because, Kate and Laura, right, Kate's big area as a physician and as a researcher is REDS. And so Kate, within the female athlete program at Boston Children's, Kate has a couple of different sports nutritionists on her team. Mm-hmm. And so when I was with Kate this summer, I talked to Laura Moretti. They call each other their work wives, which is perfect
I know
for
both
them.
of them well.
Yeah. Laura and I actually talked about that. And I think it is a research project that we're going to do. And it really is just, clinical based work. I don't know much about that, but I don't know anything about it. I could speculate, but I think it's irresponsible to do that. Especially in such a public forum like this podcast. But I suspect that we'll know more about that in the next year or two.
Great. Can't wait. So you're part of Pink Brains. We'd love to hear what Pink Brains stands for and what you guys are working for in the future. Love the name.
So I think, Rebecca, do you mean Pink Concussions? Oh,
Pink Concussions. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Pink Concussions. Yes. I am a part of that group. I'm so happy to be a part of that group. Catherine Snedeker is the founder and ED of that group. And that particular group is truly focused on how females experience head injuries. Catherine is a huge advocate in this area. And I have never known anybody who can pull together a meeting like she can. She can get the most important people in the world in one room to have a meaningful conversation about research agendas, about funding, about establishing priorities. I mean, she has this, she's got it going on. And she, I think, sees her role as sort of an advocate and educator. And so for that particular group, I focus mostly with them on research. And so it's interesting because Catherine, we have something in the works at UNCG for Catherine, and basically hope that very soon she'll be coming on board with us as a research scientist.
Oh, great.
So that she can get more involved in the research and so that we can have more of a practical application, because that's where she really is really interested in doing some very important work.
Love it. Yeah, definitely needed. So curious, Donna, in all your busyness, how do you live out the fit philosophy, trying to balance your performance, health, intellect, and a few minutes for yourself?
So I love that question, and I think it's so important. But, the interesting thing is, I think, so oftentimes people talk about like a work-life balance, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily know that anything is ever really in balance when it comes to that. I think we just on a daily basis or whenever we prioritize things, right? And so yesterday was a really long day for me, but I still managed to get in an hour of yoga. I have 2 dogs. I walk my dogs every morning. I do like a walk run with them every morning. So one of the things I try to do is sort of couple some things together. So to spend time with friends, especially after a very busy week, we'll often meet and go for a walk or go for a hike, get our dogs together to play, things like that. But I consider myself to be fortunate in this regard. I am 47 years old, don't have children, and I'm not married. So I sleep 8 to 9 hours a night. Most of my waking hours are spent somehow engaged in my work because I absolutely love it. And I do find time to spend with friends and family. And like I said, kind of coupling things together. And, I think my life is very different than some of my female colleagues who have multiple children, have a partner, a spouse, have, and all the other things that come along with that. I don't. So I've always known that I never wanted kids, and I don't. Like I said, I mean, yeah, I actually feel very I don't know. I'm going to say the word balanced, but I just said I didn't believe in that word really in this regard, but I feel very fortunate in that way.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we can't wait to hear more about what you learn. And
thank you.
We'll be sure to put the links to some of your research and the pink concussions. And Donna, I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I really had a good time talking to you.
Same here.
Okay.
Bye, Queens.
Bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by yours truly. I'm excited to announce the releasing of my book, Finding Your Sweet Spot in Sport, Avoiding Relative Energy Deficit in Sport, also known as RED-S, by optimizing your energy balance. Be sure to follow me on social media or go to my website, www.beccamcconville.com, to find out when the release date is set and when it'll be on Amazon. Bye, Queens.
For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen.
And Hashtag Fit for a Queen.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.